My ex-mother-in-law, Agnes, was a connoisseur of cruelty disguised as piety. After her son, David, my estranged husband, died, she didn't just mourn, she mobilized. Using her standing in the community gospel church, she launched a vicious campaign to paint my daughters and me as villains, all to hide her own family's considerable sins and seize control. She thought her lies were divinely sanctioned, her position unassailable. Agnes had no clue I was armed with a different kind of gospel, a meticulously compiled dossier of irrefutable proof ready to be delivered directly to her flock. She was orchestrating what she believed would be our public shaming. She was about to become the star of her own. David's death was the messy end to an already shattered marriage. We were divorcing due to his profound betrayal, an affair with a woman named Linda, resulting in two young sons whose existence my teenage daughters, Sophie and Lily, tragically discovered. This revelation and the subsequent deaths of both David and Linda left the boys orphaned and my girls deeply traumatized. For Agnes and her husband Arthur, this complex tragedy wasn't a call for compassion, but a strategic opportunity. They launched a brutal custody battle for my daughters and relentlessly pressured us to let them move into my home. They were oblivious, or willfully ignorant, to the pain their son had inflicted and the deep distrust he, and they by extension, had sown in his own children. Their version of family was built on control, not genuine care. They were about to receive a very public lesson in the power of truth. The months following David's death were a blur of lawyers, hushed conversations, and the constant gnawing anxiety of Agnes and Arthur's machinations. They seemed to view their son's passing not as a family tragedy, requiring unity and support for his children, but as a green light to escalate their war against me. Sophie, my eldest, retreated into a shell of quiet observation, her bright spirit dimmed by the weight of her father's secrets and her grandparents' aggression. Lily, my youngest, bless her heart, tried to maintain a brave face, but the cracks were showing. The therapy was helping, inch by painful inch, but Agnes and Arthur seemed determined to undo any progress with their relentless interference. Their attempts to gain custody of my girls were particularly galling. They painted me as an unfit mother, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness in court filings, twisting my grief and my efforts to shield my daughters from further trauma into something sinister. Their desire to move in with us was couched in terms of needing family support in their old age, but it felt more like an invasion, an attempt to control our lives from within our own home. I stood firm, a wall against their demands, but it was exhausting. The fragile truce we'd maintained, if one could even call it that, shattered completely on Lily's 15th birthday. Her actual party was planned for later in the month, but I wanted to do something special for her on the day itself. We live in a town with a wonderful weekend market, a vibrant place filled with stalls selling fresh produce, local cheeses, handcrafted goods, and all sorts of treats. It was Lily's happy place. I gave her a budget, a mischievous grin, and set her loose to gather whatever treasures her heart desired, which, for a 15-year-old, mostly translated to an armful of chocolate, artisanal sweets, and quirky trinkets. Sophie and I were browsing nearby, keeping a casual eye on her. After about an hour, a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. Lily wasn't one to wander off without checking in. Just as I pulled out my phone to call her, it rang. It was Lily, her voice choked with sobs. "Mom," she cried,
Some weird old ladies have cornered me. They're saying awful things."
A cold fury, primal and fierce, surged through me. I grabbed Sophie, and we ran towards the food court area where Lily said she was. We found her. My bright, sensitive daughter backed against a bakery stall, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by a semicircle of 6 older women. Their faces were pinched with disapproval, their voices sharp and accusatory. I recognized a few of them instantly. Members of Agnes and Arthur's church, the Community Gospel Church. They were berating Lily, loud enough for passers-by to stare, for being unchristian, for dishonoring her grandparents by refusing to spend more time with Agnes and Arthur. And this was the verbal equivalent of a slap in the face, for not wanting to be a good big sister to her poor orphaned baby brothers. My daughters were the ones who had found the irrefutable proof of David's affair, the ones who had uncovered the existence of these children. The poor orphaned baby brothers were a symbol of their father's deepest betrayal, a source of profound trauma they were painstakingly working through with their therapist. For these women to throw that in Lily's face in public on her birthday, it was monstrous.
I pushed through them, placing myself firmly between the flock, as I now mentally dubbed them, and my trembling daughter. "Sophie," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Take Lily's things, go pay for them, and then go straight to the car, now." Sophie, bless her, didn't hesitate. She gently guided a still sobbing Lily away. Then I turned to the flock. "How dare you?" I began, my voice low but vibrating with rage. "How dare you ambush a child and spew your venomous nonsense?" Some of them looked momentarily taken aback by my directness, but one, a woman with a particularly sour face, whom I vaguely remembered as one of Agnes's closer friends, puffed herself up. "We are merely reminding her of her Christian duties. Her grandparents are suffering." "Her grandparents," I shot back, "are the architects of their own suffering, and you have no right to harass my child."
"You're the worst of all," another chimed in, her eyes glinting with malice. "Refusing to obey your ex-in-laws like a good Christian wife should. No wonder your husband sought comfort elsewhere." That was it, the implication, the sheer audacity of it. "Obey?" I almost laughed. "My husband is dead. My marriage to him was over long before that because of his actions, not mine. And my role as a good Christian wife, as you so quaintly put it, certainly doesn't extend to tolerating abuse or bowing to the whims of people who supported his deceptions." The argument escalated. Voices were raised. The accusations became wilder, more unhinged. Eventually, the market manager, drawn by the commotion, asked all of us to leave. The flock followed me to the car park, a pack of muttering, judgmental vultures, their eyes burning into my back. I bundled my shaken daughters into the car and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. That evening, after Sophie and Lily were finally settled, emotionally drained but safe in their beds, I went online. I needed to understand what had just happened, how this coordinated attack had come about. I reached out to a man from the Community Gospel Church, someone I'd always found reasonable, a distant cousin of David's, who had occasionally expressed sympathy for my situation in private. I recounted the market incident, my voice still shaking with residual anger. He was appalled, apologized profusely on behalf of the saner elements of his church, and then, with a sigh, he told me what was going on. Agnes, my dear ex-mother-in-law, had posted a massive, sprawling saga on the church's private Facebook group. It was a masterwork of manipulation, a sob story worthy of a daytime soap opera, designed to garner maximum sympathy and righteous indignation from her fellow congregants. She painted my daughters and me as villains of the highest order. We were, according to Agnes, leaving her and Arthur homeless and penniless. A blatant lie, considering they had inherited David's personal bank account and his not insignificant life insurance policy, details she conveniently omitted. She lamented how her granddaughters, Sophie and Lily, refused to even speak to them, breaking their elderly hearts. Then came the kicker, the part that explained the flock's attack on Lily regarding the orphaned baby brothers. Agnes accused us, specifically me, of being the reason she lost her grandsons. The boys, she explained to her rapt Facebook audience, were now living with distant relatives of David on his father's side.
Now, this church, the Community Gospel Church, and many of its members held some, let's say, traditional views, especially on topics like LGBTQ+ rights, that often made my skin crawl. But they had one peculiar, almost paradoxical saving grace. They were incredibly, almost fanatically strict about marital infidelity. Cheating was a cardinal sin, a massive no-no, regardless of whether it was the husband or the wife. It was grounds for immediate condemnation. So how, I wondered, did Agnes manage to blame me for the existence of affair children without exposing David's affair and thereby condemning him and, by extension, herself and Arthur for their complicity?
Her solution was a stroke of twisted genius, utterly disgusting in its implications. She claimed that Linda, the affair partner, had actually been our surrogate. She concocted a story that I, Clara, was unable to have more children after Lily, and so we had sought out a surrogate to carry more babies for us. Then, according to Agnes's tale, when the babies were born and turned out to be boys, I, in my monstrous feminine fickleness, had rejected them because I hadn't wanted sons. This vile accusation that I would abandon my own children based on their gender was designed to make me utterly repellent to the church community, to explain the children's existence without tainting Saint David's memory with the truth of his infidelity. And of course, the more extremist, gossip-hungry members of the flock lapped it up. They showered Agnes and Arthur with love, support, prayers, and offers of casseroles, all while directing their collective righteous fury towards me and my unnatural, unchristian daughters. Reading the sympathetic comments under Agnes's post, the declarations of outrage against me, I felt a cold, hard resolve crystallize in my chest. She had fired the first shot in a war she couldn't possibly win because she had forgotten one crucial detail. I had the truth, all of it, and I was no longer inclined to keep it private.
The fury that had ignited in me at the market, seeing Lily's tears, now solidified into a plan. Agnes had used her community as a weapon, hiding her deceit behind a veneer of piety. She had slandered my name, traumatized my children further, and twisted reality into a grotesque caricature to suit her narrative. Enough was truly, finally, enough. It was time to clean up this mess, not with angry Facebook comments or tearful phone calls, but with cold, hard, irrefutable evidence. It was time to deploy the truth with prejudice.
Because David and I were mid-divorce when he died, and because his betrayals were the primary grounds for that divorce, I had meticulously collected a mountain of evidence. My lawyer had advised it, and my own need for clarity had driven it.
Photos, text messages, emails, a comprehensive chronicle of his double life and his parents' complicity. Since the divorce was never finalized, there were no legal injunctions, no gag orders preventing me from sharing this information. Agnes, in her arrogance, had forgotten this. Or perhaps she simply never believed I would use it. She underestimated me. Badly.
I took the next day off work. My first stop was a local print shop. I explained that I needed high-quality color copies of photographs and text messages. A significant number of them. I wanted every detail to be crystal clear, every facial expression, every damning word. I paid extra for the best paper they had, a thick, glossy stock that felt substantial in the hand. This wasn't just about presenting facts. It was about presentation. It was about delivering a shock that was as aesthetically impactful as it was emotionally devastating. The evidence I had was extensive. There were the photographs, David and Linda, his affair partner, caught in various stages of intimacy. Some were clandestine shots I had been sent anonymously during the divorce discovery process. Others were culled from social media accounts Linda hadn't locked down tightly enough. The prize among them, the one that still made my stomach churn, was a series of photos taken in my own living room, on my sofa, David and Linda entangled, laughing, clearly comfortable and familiar in the space I had built for my family. Linda looked nothing like me. Different hair, different skin tone, a completely different build. There would be no mistaking her for a surrogate I had chosen. Then there were the text conversations. Pages and pages of them. Sickeningly sweet exchanges between David and Linda, planning their trysts, dreaming of a future together. But more importantly, there were the texts between David and his parents, Agnes and Arthur. Texts where he confessed his affair, expressed his confusion and unhappiness in our marriage, and received not condemnation, not advice to do the right thing by his wife and daughters, but sympathy, support, and even strategic advice on how to manage the situation, how to keep things quiet. They were complicit. They had known. They had enabled him. I also had the texts Agnes and Arthur themselves had sent me after I confronted David and initiated the divorce. Messages filled with guilt trips, accusations, and demands that I reconcile for the sake of the family, meaning their reputation. And then the crown jewels of my collection, the messages that made my blood boil every time I looked at them. The texts Agnes and Arthur had sent directly to my daughters, Sophie and Lily. Vicious, manipulative messages. In one, sent just 2 days after David's funeral, Agnes had called my grieving daughters ungrateful bastards and screamed at them via text that it was their fault their father had died, because their discovery of his affair and their subsequent distress had, in Agnes's twisted logic, forced me to start the divorce proceedings, which had apparently caused David so much stress it led to his fatal accident. It was victim blaming of the most heinous kind, directed at traumatized children. This particular piece of evidence, I knew, would be explosive. Back home, with stacks of freshly printed high-resolution evidence piled on my dining table, I began the assembly. This wasn't just going to be a random dump of papers. Oh no. I spent hours, meticulous, focused hours, creating what I mentally termed my truth packets. I bought a set of slim, elegant binders, the kind you might see at a professional conference, and I designed a cover page for each. The centerpiece of this cover page was that damning photograph of David and Linda, lips locked, in my living room. Their faces were perfectly clear. Underneath this portrait of betrayal, I typed a simple, factual caption. David blank last name and Linda blank her last name's love story. Presented for your edification. No overt anger, just the cold, inescapable truth.
Inside each binder, I carefully arranged the evidence in a logical, narrative flow. The affair photos first, then David's texts with Linda, followed by his texts with Agnes and Arthur revealing their complicity. Then came Agnes and Arthur's harassing texts to me. And finally, saved for maximum impact, copies of their cruel, abusive messages to Sophie and Lily, especially the bastards text. Each section was clearly labeled. These weren't just binders, they were indictments. They were designed to look like the little prayer song packets or informational booklets the church often provided for its members, the kind people might pick up without a second thought. The next Sunday, before the main service, I drove to the Community Gospel Church. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I walked into the empty fellowship hall, heading to the back where a small desk always held spare songbooks and newsletters for anyone who needed them. As I knew from years of reluctant attendance with David, these were never checked or monitored. I calmly placed my truth packets, about 30 of them, enough for key members and busybodies to get one, among the official church literature. Then I turned and walked away, leaving the truth to do its work. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could almost hear the ticking of the bomb I had just planted. I didn't attend the service that Sunday, of course. My presence would have been a distraction and possibly diluted the pure, unadulterated shock I intended my truth packets to deliver. Instead, I spent the morning in a state of calm anticipation, a stark contrast to the turmoil Agnes had unleashed upon my family. I imagined the scene, the initial discovery, the rustle of glossy paper, the dawning horror on the faces of the flock as they flipped through the pages. The whispers starting, spreading like wildfire through the pews, far faster and more effectively than any sermon. By early afternoon, my phone started buzzing. It was my sympathetic church contact, the distant cousin. He sounded breathless, almost giddy. "Clara," he said, "you are a legend. The church is, well, it's imploding. In a good way. For you, at least." He described how the binders had been picked up, one by one, how a hush had fallen over sections of the congregation, followed by furious, scandalized murmuring, how people had started comparing notes, pointing at specific photos, gasping at the text messages. The carefully constructed facade of Agnes and Arthur's sainthood and poor, sainted David's martyrdom had not just cracked, it had been obliterated. The fallout, he told me, was spectacular. The church's Facebook group, previously Agnes's personal echo chamber, erupted into a firestorm of biblical proportions. This time, however, the venom was not directed at me or my daughters. It was aimed squarely at David, now revealed as a common adulterer, and Linda, who was being called every name in the book. Jezebel was apparently one of the milder terms, according to my contact. He said the pastor himself had to step in and start deleting comments and issuing warnings just to keep the online discussion from descending into outright profanity. The sheer hypocrisy was breathtaking. The same people who had eagerly condemned me on Agnes's fabrications were now baying for David's posthumous blood and Linda's eternal damnation. But the real heat, the most satisfying part for me, was reserved for Agnes and Arthur. Their carefully crafted image as grieving, wronged parents and grandparents was shredded. The evidence of their complicity in David's affair, their lies about the surrogacy, and most damningly, their vile, abusive texts to Sophie and Lily, particularly the one calling them bastards and blaming them for David's death. That had sent shockwaves of genuine outrage through even some of the most hardened church members. Harassing a child was one thing. Verbally abusing and emotionally torturing your own grieving granddaughters, especially with such cruel language, just days after their father died. That was a line even the community gospel church wasn't willing to excuse.
The judgment from the church community, however, was still filtered through their peculiar lens of morality. My contact relayed that the general consensus was that David was a low-down cheating hound and Linda was a scarlet woman who got what was coming to her. Agnes and Arthur were seen as deceitful, manipulative hypocrites who had borne false witness and brought shame upon the house of God. As for me, well, in their eyes, I was still technically in the wrong for initiating the divorce proceedings against David in the first place. A good Christian wife, according to their doctrine, should endure, forgive, pray for her husband's redemption, not seek legal separation. However, given the shocking nature of David's profound betrayal and the unconscionable abuse heaped upon my daughters by Agnes and Arthur, my actions were deemed understandable, a temporary lapse, perhaps. They even expressed hope that I would one day return to the light, presumably by re-embracing their narrow definition of faith and wifely duty. It was a backhanded vindication, wrapped in layers of theological nonsense, but it was vindication nonetheless in their eyes. The important thing was that the immediate threat to my daughter's peace of mind from that quarter had been neutralized.
A few days later, 2 envelopes arrived in the mail. They were apology letters, penned in shaky, elderly handwriting from 2 of the women who had cornered Lily at the market. They were brief, awkward, and didn't excuse their behavior, but they expressed regret for causing distress to my daughter. Small tokens, perhaps, but they were something. More bizarrely, there was also a formal-looking letter from the church council itself, expressing sympathy for the trials my family had endured, and, in a truly surreal twist, inviting me to join the community gospel church for support and fellowship during this difficult time. I had to laugh. The audacity was almost admirable. My truth packets had apparently made me something of a local legend, the wronged woman who fought back with irrefutable proof. They probably wanted to study me, or perhaps try to save me properly this time. The invitation went straight into the recycling bin. My rebirth, my comeback, didn't need their brand of support. It was fueled by a mother's love and a healthy dose of righteous anger. I had faced the dragon in its own den and emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant. The community's upheaval was just the aftershock of a truth bomb well deployed.
The ultimate payoff, the real resolution to this sordid chapter, was the swift and public fall from grace of Agnes and Arthur. They had built their social standing, their identities, around their prominent role in the community gospel church. They had wielded their influence like a weapon, confident in their untouchability. My truth packets stripped them of that power, layer by painful layer, in front of the very people whose admiration they craved. They were shamed. They were shunned.
The whispers that had once been directed at me and my daughters now followed Agnes and Arthur, heavy with condemnation and disgust. Within a few weeks, unable to bear the humiliation and the cold shoulders, they quietly left the church they had called home for decades. Their reign of sanctimonious terror was over. Agnes, true to form, couldn't resist a final, pitiable performance on social media. She posted a long, rambling diatribe on her personal Facebook wall, no longer having access to the church group, of course. It was a lament about how alienated she felt, how no one cared for the elderly anymore, how friends had abandoned them in their time of need. She waxed lyrical about how she wished her great, wonderful son David were still alive because he would have taken care of her and Arthur. He would have protected them from this cruel world.
I read her post with a grim sort of amusement. With what money, Agnes? With what resources would David have taken care of you? The man had been living largely off my income for years, a fact conveniently omitted from her hagiographies of him. I was the breadwinner, the one who had maintained the household, paid the bills, and ensured our daughters had everything they needed, all while he was squandering money on his affair.
For my daughters, Sophie and Lily, the resolution was quieter but more profound. The direct harassment stopped. The oppressive weight of their grandparents' judgment, which had been a constant presence in their lives, lifted. They could breathe a little easier. The apology notes they received were small gestures, but they mattered. They saw that truth could prevail, that their mother would fight for them, and that sometimes, even in a flawed world, there could be a measure of justice. Our home became a sanctuary again, free from the shadow of Agnes and Arthur's impending demands or legal threats concerning their immediate welfare outside the ongoing custody battle, which now felt less threatening. As for me, there was a deep, almost weary satisfaction. My goal had never been to destroy Agnes and Arthur for the sake of destruction. It had been to protect my children, to stop the lies, and to reclaim our peace. The truth packets were a calculated risk, a last resort, but they had worked more effectively than I could have hoped. The irony of the church's stance, condemning David's sin while simultaneously critiquing my decision to divorce him for it, wasn't lost on me. It highlighted the selective morality that often dictates such communities. But I didn't need their complete approval. I had the truth, and that was enough. The legal battle for custody eventually fizzled out. Agnes and Arthur, stripped of their community support and their moral high ground, seemed to lose their stomach for the fight. Their accusations now rang hollow, even in the sterile environment of a courtroom. Life settled into a new normal for us, a quieter normal. We continued our healing, my daughters and I, stronger and more united than before. Agnes had inadvertently taught me the power of meticulously documented truth, and I, in turn, had taught her that a mother protecting her cubs is the most formidable force of nature, capable of dismantling even the most entrenched hypocrisy, one beautifully bound, truth-filled packet at a time. She sought to shame us into submission. Instead, she found herself shamed into silence. And that, I suppose, is its own form of poetic justice.
When lies dress up in righteous robes and try to steal your peace, remember that truth has its own undeniable power. Don't let manipulators write your story or define your worth, especially when they hide their own sins behind a veneer of piety. Sometimes exposing the truth clearly and without apology isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life and protecting those you love. They tried to bury us with their deceit. They didn't realize we were seeds, ready to break through with the undeniable light of facts.